Welcome to the ARSC 2022 opening plenary, documenting Detroit musicians on global music. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that ARSC is a nonprofit organization managed by volunteers, dedicated to the preservation and study of sound recordings of all types. If you are an ARSC member, please consider becoming more involved by taking on a volunteer role. Contact any board member for details. If you are not an ARSC member, consider joining for just $25 during our conference special before June 15th. You'll have access to hundreds of hours of past conference recordings, the ARSC journal, and a lot more. I've been an ARSC member for 10 years and value the wealth of knowledge held by its membership. Throughout this session, you're welcome to type in and send questions via the Q&A feature. And between sessions, meet and chat with other attendees in the Hublio Lounge. Let's begin.
All right.
Today's plenary speakers are Jahra McKinney and Kimberly Schroeder. Michelle is the leader and founding member of the Detroit Sound Conservancy, and an archivist, librarian, singer, and griot. She focuses on making cultural history come alive and accessible to all. A Detroiter, she has worked in this community for over 50 years and has studied and performed African dance, folkloric music, and storytelling and percussion.
Yep.
She worked with her late husband, Harold McKinney, and his Detroit Heritage Performance Lab, and is the founder of the Women's A Cappella Vocal and Shakeré group.
Shakeré, that's it.
Okay. Today, she continues to gather together the community and helps to express its beautiful legacies. Kim Schroeder is the coordinator of the Archival Administration program at Wayne State University. She was a multimedia archiving consultant for more than 20 years before coming on as a full-time faculty at the School of Information Sciences. Over the last 7 years, she has focused her energy on oral history. Her oral history class interviews Detroit activists and musicians, and her goal is that no one group should be left out of the history books, and oral history is a venue to assist in that documentation. So without further ado, we'll begin our session.
Okay, I want to start off. I am the leader of the Detroit Sound Conservancy, and the Sound Conservancy is, as far as I know, the only music archives in Detroit, or in this region actually, that's devoted to the preservation and the celebration of Detroit music. And by Detroit music, I mean this whole big metropolitan, greater Detroit, Ann Arbor, all of these places all around. And so through archival practices, education programs, placekeeping, performances, all these kinds of outreach activities, we're hoping to expand access to Detroit's music culture and history and legacy that's made Detroit the most influential music city in the world, to me. I mean, everywhere I've gone in the world, people know about Detroit. And Detroiters have innovated so much, like techno, funk, jazz, R&B, and we've shaped nearly every music genre in the world, from punk, rap. I mean, let's go. And this has happened across over generations. So it's a remarkable organization. I'm really honored to be a member of it, and I take the leading of it quite seriously. And so today we're focusing on the oral history, and oral history, especially in underserved populations. We're the largest African-American population in a city in the United States. And this means we have quite quite a lot of influence, but the problem is that we are not written into too many of the history books. Our voices has been missing. So oral history is a wonderful way to get that history known and heard, and it fills in the gaps, and it advocates for the people's voice, the people who were ignored or thought less of. And so we're in a situation now where we have to build trust, and we have to get the scholars to start writing and the thesis, the dissertations, the books. What they need to write about these people, this voice, this music history that so many people are dying off, and we're losing encyclopedias right now. People who are encyclopedias and who really know the culture. So it's an emergency as far as I'm concerned. And we want to make the history accessible through oral history. So this is really a important session for me and for the Detroit Sound Conservancy. And we are community archives, and Kim has been really wonderful supporting us, because we're still kind of new. And she sends me students, and she helps. She's an advisor for Detroit Sound Conservancy, so she is really a champion, and I really appreciate her being here with us. And so I'm gonna switch to the presentation, and this presentation, I want to do it for kids, so you have to forgive the little bright colors and things like that. But that's what that's about. Okay. So here we are. I want to get this. Let's see if I'm beginning. There we are. So the Detroit Sound Conservancy has been collecting oral histories, and we have three groups of oral histories. There's Record Detroit, or Record DET there. We have the Community Jazz Series, and we have Sonic Solidarity. So that's like our advocacy arm. So Record Detroit was collected especially by our executive director emeritus, Carlton Golds. In fact, most of these were due to him, his collecting. And in the Record Detroit one, he asked the same questions, and he had the same, he asked the same questions of all the people. And the ones that really stick out in my mind are Lavelle Williams, who is vice president of the Detroit Sound Conservancy and who has passed away, sadly. There's Krista Zewski, and she also works at Wayne State University, and she's an archaeologist. And then there's Don Letts, and he is a producer, a movie maker, well, filmmaker, they say it. And he is a British African. So he has been very, well, you'll see as he talks. And then in the Community Jazz Series, there's two piano players and a bass player, Ray. So Ken Cox, he was the only group that I know of that was picked up by a major label, a major jazz label from Detroit. And he was more of an internal kind of musician. He was a composer more than a performer, I think. And Harold was kind of just the opposite. He was really friendly, a raconteur. He was out reaching out to people, and he got the jazz community here in Detroit recognized by the funders and the foundations. So he was very known and beloved in the community. Ken Cox talks about some of the same things Harold does from another point of view. So Ken Cox left Detroit and toured a lot and then came back. Harold never left. So they're it's kind of interesting how they talk about jazz because of that. And then in Sonic Solidarity, we have Melvin Davis, and I think Kim's going to have him talk about him a little bit too. He kind of bridges the doo-wop to the R&B, to jazz. I mean, this guy bridges it all. And he was a voice for me, helping me with my music scape as a young person. And Marion Hayden, She also is a very great advocate, and she's also one of our advisors too. So I want you to hear little pieces of what they had to say about why Detroit is such a great place for music. And then finally, the transcripts is Ed Wolfram, and he's an inventor. He is one of the major engineers, studio engineers, and he was working with the United Sound. So his voice and his take on Detroit music is great too. And also the fact that United Sound, I mean, he really helped that bring the award-winning things that happened for United Sound were a lot of times due to him. And that sound that you heard in the Motown sound, that was him. His little invention helped the bass players and the guitar players. So let's get right to it. So we're going to start off with Lavelle Williams. And he's speaking, he's talking about Detroit and the silence on the history of the gay music community. So he was born in 1967, died in 2018. And the biggest thing I think is ignored would be the gay music history in Detroit. That's the biggest issue, ignored by all the world. It's not a Black thing, not a white thing. So he goes on and talks about that. And let's hear a little bit. I'm going to escape from here.
My name is Carlton Goals.
And this was done by Carl.
Conservancy Record Night at Urban Bean Coffee House. We've been
No.
so at
No, that I don't
Can you
remember.
turn it up
I
a
wish
little quiet?
my memory was that good.
Motown is known the world over. Describe one aspect of Detroit music history that you wish to got more attention.
Well, I guess that, of course, the biggest thing I think is ignored would be the gay music history in Detroit. That would be the biggest issue. Ignored by all worlds. You know, it's not a Black thing, it's not a white thing or a rock thing or an R&B thing. It's across the board. You know, I think that would be the number one thing that's totally still in the closet.
Is there just agreed? But is there any particular? I mean, it's 2014 now. Today actually is World AIDS Day. Actually, any particular is a specific thing that we could do in that vein? I mean, I think you're right, but
I think the biggest thing is for people to talk openly. You know, when you start talking to people about gay clubs or gay music or gay DJs or bands, people tend to shut up. You know, I feel like we're still one of the most closeted cities in the country, and it plays itself out really well amongst the music world in Detroit. And it doesn't make much sense to me, but even as you said, it's 2014, but it continues and it's strong. And you know, you can be looking somebody in the face who you know knows the history, was a part of it, but they don't necessarily want to talk about it. You know, it's horrible. But like I said, it's still in the closet.
What's maybe ask you two individual questions, then we got our closers here.
Right
One
there.
other organization I know that you are involved with is the Hackley Collection at the Detroit.
And then he goes on to talk about the other music venues that are here. Okay, so going on, another person who has a really great voice here in Detroit is the archaeologist Christopher Zewski. And her whole thing is placekeeping. And she's talking here about archaeologists, you know, concerned with the music making spaces here in Detroit. And she came to Bluebird Inn and actually found some records that were hidden in the ceiling that showed that Black people were helping each other survive in this space that they were in, because it was such a systemic racism that was going on. So she talks a little bit about that.
Michelle, you might want to explain what the Bluebird Inn is for folks that don't know.
Right. The Bluebird is a hearth. It was a neighborhood bar that started out kind of as an eatery more, and then it became like the premier place for jazz musicians to come through and be here in Detroit with our people. So she talks about how she went in there and actually unearthed, and I think it was like one of the first archaeological projects that was ever done in a Black urban setting. We're not well represented in that field either. So this her take on this about the spatial layout, if I can find
graduate and graduate level. You can take a virtual because it's the material ballroom or the vanity ballroom, and this is a prototype, so it's a seat.
Sorry about this.
Each
Here we are.
group of students focused on 4 places, and those 4 places were bundled around a genre of music. And these are somewhat superficial divisions, but they served as entry points. So for example, since we were talking about Motown, we picked 4 places that had genuine historical connections to each other, but were very different in character. So they're kind of an assemblage of different music-making places. So of course you have Hitsville, USA, you have, but then you also have Barry Gordon's mansion in Boston Edison. And you can't have one without the other. You know, the ideas that are being fed into the music writing at Hitsville are being made at these parties at Barry Gordy's house out in Boston Edison. But then you also have within that package the Brewster Douglas homes, where a number of the artists and backup singers and musicians were living at the time. Then you also have the Donovan building, which is now gone. It was torn down to make way for a parking lot when the Super Bowl was in town. So all of these places are linked to each other. So that gives us a kind of spatial layout of music making in the city. And it's a kind of example of the nature of Detroit's music industry. Very different, very kind of eclectic. You have recording studios that are houses, single family houses, right? You see that at Hitsville, you see it at United Sound. You have apartment buildings where artists are forming groups and getting to know each other. You have regular business buildings, and you have kind of domestic dwellings as well. So in a nutshell, we created 24 of these stories, and it was a quick rapid fire effort. 2-minute videos resulted. There, you know, in teaching any class, you have examples that are very strong and examples that could use some improvement, but these are all available on YouTube right now. You can go to Making Music in Detroit or Urban Archaeology Detroit and view some of them.
Yeah, so that she really made that project and made those buildings and those places more accessible, the music places that were here. And then she goes on to an interesting spot that she goes on to. Let me see if I can get to that.
At the Detroit
real quick.
Are you
the structure for creating these food stories of cults, and it's happening now.
What was that experience like? Would you recommend?
Getting students, so I would definitely recommend integrating.
Hearing the answers already, but I'll just give you one more strike at it. What do you think we lose if we do not preserve Detroit's musical history? So you were saying already that some of these buildings have gone down. What do you think what's the consequence of that for you? What are the stakes for you?
Yeah, I struggle with that question, because are we trying to preserve the sound, or the place that made the sound, or the place where we heard that sound? You know, what exactly are we trying to preserve here? All of that, some of it, the tangible, the intangible. You know, when we talk about, in archaeology, when we talk about heritage, cultural heritage, we're talking about tangible remains, landmarks and buildings and artifacts, but we're also talking about intangible heritage, the songs, the dances, the performances. So I think what's important is we need to strike a balance between the two, and that we're aware that with one comes the other. So while it's wonderful to push to remember buildings for what they once were, whether or not we can preserve them is an issue for the preservationists, we don't want to do that at the expense of forgetting about the oral history archives and the musicians who are aging but still alive and have memories to share, or the records collections that people have. So for me, it would be striking a balance and maybe promoting more awareness about the resources we have at our fingertips and the ways in which we can kind of make them accessible to people.
Yes, they're very, very important. I really love her. So I'm going to go skip now to our friend Don Letts. And Don Letts is he's talking about what music was to the people there in Jamaica and in Britain, the black people who were in Britain being affected by Detroit music. So he's a great believer that every generation needs its own soundtrack. And I think that he kind of hit it on the head. So let's hear a little bit of his take on that. Well, with his parents coming from Jamaica into Britain, and then the result of that.
And funny enough, in Jamaica, have their own material, what a shitload of chart hits. It worked in the creation of the label. And more to the point, if you look at the people he's cast,
he's very
detail, he's
verbal.
Bang on. I mean, the actual people that are doing the reconstructions actually, you know, and I mean, the whole evolution of, yeah, you can actually feel. I mean, some music you can actually feel literally, you know. Yeah. But the thing about Jamaican music is the sound system actually developed as a reaction to what was happening in America, because in Jamaica, before sound system culture, my parents' generation would have been listening to old school R&B and boogie woogie. Right. Now, when that changed to rock and roll in the States, right, the Jamaicans weren't into that. And that kind of forced them to come up with their own soundtrack that was relevant to their situation, and that was ska. Right. And but this stuff wasn't getting played on the radio in Jamaica either. Right. So they came up with these, I mean, effectively, they're kind of mobile discos. Yeah, no, absolutely. But much more than that, because, you know, they had a whole culture around them. I mean, you had the guy that was playing the records who's called the operator. Mm-hmm. You've got a guy on the mic who's, and funny enough, in Jamaica, it's called the DJ, and it's not the guy on the turntable. Right. You know, and you've got a whole sort of posse of people that help run and string up the sound system. And
so he goes on and explains how they jumped from the R&B and the doo-wop into ska, which is a Jamaican music that really has a lot of horns, and it kind of sounds like jazz. But they didn't like the rock. And so they went on to, he talks about how the music here did not really,
60%.
It didn't really,
you know, Jamaica's this tiny little island that spent years under
it didn't really express what their problems that were happening in Britain.
Colonization. Yeah. And now
so
this tiny little pain and escape sometimes. But the bottom line, the economy's having a massive, you know, literally, form of alternative information has started to get a lot, you know, particularly after the Vietnam. I've lost my train of poets. Yes. You'd have to talk about last poets. You'd have to talk about Gil Scott Heron. Yes. And then, although, you know, they were speaking about the Black American experience, which is so different to the British one. Yes. I mean, my great grandparents were dragged kicking and screaming to this country. My actual parents bought a ticket to the UK. Right. You know, with the promise of a multicultural dream that didn't materialise. Right. So initially, for some kind of reaction to all of that, we were listening to all, you know, Last Poets and Gil Scott, because there was no English equivalent. Until in the mid-70s, we had a poet called Linton Kwesi Johnson.
I saw him here.
So that's where they took over their own music, and then he brought in punk after he got older, and that really punk and reggae together, that came into a whole nother being. So so he also talked about how Detroit really made a difference. So I'm going to move on now to the sonic solidarity part, and this is where the music brought everybody together. And it supported and preserved our musical legacy through empathy, diversity, connectivity. Those things brought us together as a community. And now we're trying to put this solidarity into the flesh at the legendary Bluebird Inn, because it started out as a community hearth, and now we're returning it to that. And the archives and the music is what all of us can come together around very easily, and we're trying to advocate for so that the Detroit city won't knock stuff down that really should be saved like the Bluebird Inn. So these are the people speaking of advocacy and talk about what makes Detroit great. I guess my little attempt to have things.
Sonic Solidarity is sponsored in part by the Michigan Council for the Arts.
Having a good time, I feel like why should you?
Yeah.
But Detroit is probably one of the most talented cities on the planet. And, you know, it's a pleasure to represent this city, like I say, with the professionalism and the energy and the spirituality that has made us great. So I will continue to do that. But Detroit, as I say, it's an amazingly talented city, and it had great opportunity. But it's one thing about the city, when you have a lot of great people, the competition is fierce.
Yeah.
There's a good side to that, and there's a not so good side to that. The good side is that competition creates greatness. If you don't have competition, someone to measure yourself against, you probably won't reach your pinnacle. But Detroit, with the greatness that it has displayed to the world, it just makes it a little bit tough. Every artist can't be super successful.
Right.
And I've probably had out at least 100 songs, and I had 1 million seller, which was Crawl Before You Walk on the Invictus label. And I had some success with Groovesville, with Golden World, because Golden World was a really big label here. They had Edwin Starr. They had Whole World is a Stage. What was the name of that group? Fantastic Four.
Oh yeah.
And
sure.
And they had Pat Lewis. They had the Debonaires. You know, they were a very successful record label, and they eventually ended up selling to Motown. And
yep. Motown is like General Motors.
No doubt about it. You know,
So he goes on and talks about how Motown kind of sucked up all of the black record labels that are around, and they sucked him up too. He became one of the people that wrote. And he worked with the Temptations and Lyman Woodard, and that's how I know Melvin Davis. He was the drummer with Lyman Woodard, who was a keyboard man here in Detroit. So these guys are all interrelated, and he brought all of that doo-wop culture and into the R&B culture and back into the jazz culture by working with Lyman Woodard. So you know this really he advocated for that sound that still, and he helped to refine it, and that still went further on into the Detroit music. He's talked about, there he is, Melvin Davis. So I want to talk about Marion Hayden. Her whole thing was about mentorship, that she was mentored along with the other youngsters at that time. And she was one of the very few female jazz bassists that were here in the city. And she's now she's taken their space and she's educating people. I think she's at U of M, University of Michigan. So I wanted you to hear a little bit about what her take on that. Let's see if I can find it. Oh my goodness, this thing is blocking me. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so Marion, her claim to fame is that she also advocated. She also advocated with the foundations. She made them more honest about how they dealt with the musicians. If I can find that clip. Right.
Sonic that's as considered to do how you play music, and so that's classical music and just the foundations of how you play music. I'm a bassist, and so that's my primary instrument. Although I did start off on cello, and through the Detroit public schools at that time. I was able to get access to some of the great jazz musicians that live here in Detroit, and that we were very fortunate to have resident musicians here in our community. And these are people that brought just a world of knowledge about the music touring experience, a very deep understanding of the relationship between jazz and musicians and people, and how its importance in the world. And I received a really thorough education from those musicians, which would be people such as still living folks like Wendell Harrison and Ursula Walker, Buddy Butson, and Charles Bowles, and then and Charlie Gabriel, the great saxophonist, and then folks who have joined the ancestors who I love dearly, such as Marcus Belgrave and Donald Walden, Ken Cox, Roy Brooks, George Benson, just a plethora of really, really great people. So,
so she goes on and talks about how they taught her how to teach. And that was really great for us, because that helped us go on to, let's see if I'm going the right way. So it brings us to one of the people that she mentioned, Ken Cox. And I told you he was more of a composer. I think he composed over 1,000 pieces of music. And so he talked about being here in Detroit, touring and going out and being around and seeing what the music industry was outside. But then he talks also about coming back home.
Phil Asley and I were just talking about it yesterday, again for about the 99,000th time, and because we were blessed. That had to be one of the most, if not the most fertile period in the Detroit area for growing up for the music, and to be growing up in the midst of that at the time was just. I have related the story in part and in total many times, and it seems unbelievable to many people, particularly those younger than I, or who might have come up in a different city. But there was music everywhere. There was music to be found everywhere. Every neighborhood had at least one bar, okay, for starters, had one bar that had live music in it. And it may have been a blues band, it may have been a rhythm and blues band, whatever. It may have been a kind of a hackneyed, what you might say, a cabaret-style jazz band, or whatever. But there was music everywhere. And as a youngster, fortunately, I could go into most of those bars. And this was all over town. This was all over town. I mean, west side, north side, you just weren't hurting for music anywhere. And further, as a youngster, fortunately, at the time, all of my peers were into good music, you know, whether it be rhythm and blues or pop like Johnny Mathis and stuff like that. It was Nat Cole. It was all good music. And so subsequently that manifested itself in their musical choices when it came to them with their various different social clubs and fraternities and whatnot. When they gave affairs, they'd always have live music, and they'd always have the younger jazz musicians, as it were, play for these dances. So there was a considerable amount of music to listen to, and there was a considerable amount of opportunity to play.
So that really helped the Detroit, and there was a lot of sharing that was going on. It wasn't just, people, working and being cold. They really taught those young guys and gave them opportunities to play that they wouldn't have ordinarily had. And so Harold, my husband, he started the trend of teaching in jazz workshops, and he taught all of his peers like Marcus Belgrave to do that, and they went on to have probably more successful and more well-known jazz workshops. But he was one of the guys that stayed here in Detroit. He didn't tour too much. He toured with Aretha Franklin in the 60s, but that she was the only one I think he really toured with, and that's his brother Ray helping to tell why Detroit was great.
Why aren't you the landlord? Yes, you. Why aren't you the landlord? Every day you go
each other. You know, I mean, Detroit was a town that I've been in other places in that near that era when the musicians were so jealous of what they knew, they wouldn't share. Yeah. But Detroit musicians would share. You know, with the young. The knowledge and compare it. They would share the knowledge with the young, and if you showed you were serious as a young jazz player, they would let you sit in, even though they couldn't do what you could do. Then they might not have had the expertise that you had, but they figured that by you playing with them, they would give them the incentive and at the same time the expertise.
Right, I've heard that a lot about those days, especially Barry Harris had his place.
And we had a nice place to jam too on the west side, a place called Marty's Basement. And you have to have people who let you do this. You know, his mother was very generous, and she never even inspected the people who came in their house. As long as they came in there for her son's jam session, he didn't even play. He loved the music, so he set up this place basement where all the musicians could come and jam, like Down Bird used to come down there, and Claire Rockamore, Funky Winfrey, and Frank Foster. When he first came to town, that's where he came first, at Maurice's Basement.
And there were a lot of others, not a lot, but there were other places in the community that had house that would be friendly to a jam sessions, like a little later on in the 50s, early 50s, there's Joe Brazil. You know,
he had a little jam at that.
He had his house. He was a tool and die maker, and he had a house over on Fleming that we used to go to all the time. And Paul Chambers lived there, and then when Paul Chambers moved out, I moved in. And they had jam sessions in the basement, and sometimes those jam sessions would go 2 days. You know, people would they wore out a piano player and a bass player.
Oh yeah,
and a drummer. They would wear them out. I could drop 10 pounds.
And they had no mercy.
No mercy. And guys would take chorus after chorus after chorus after chorus. This thing, you know, they had a 40th chorus. And you still sitting out there sweating. And then maybe if a piano player came in, you looked at him with inviting eyes, come over here, you know, but they would wear out a piano player.
Yeah, I don't know how much of the public realizes that, you know, the rhythm section being the workhorses of, remember those jam session days when you had 20 horn players lined up. And
I sprained a muscle in my hand. Playing at one of the jam sessions.
Yeah, so they go on and talk about that experience of working with working with that thing. And so the last person I want to talk about was Ed Wolfram. He was the one that worked on Hot Buttered Soul, and he was the one that also worked on What's Going On. He was the engineer for those two. And that launched Isaac Hayes' career, Hot Buttered Soul, that album. And also he had some arrangements, orchestral arrangements, which hadn't been done. It was so much instrumentation. And Ed Wolfram was the one who was able to record it just perfectly. And the other one, What's Going On, they had to hide and do that they were hiding and recording because they knew Berry Gordy wouldn't want to do what's going on because it didn't fit in with his way of doing things, and it didn't fit. He didn't want to talk about social problems. But this was during the 60s when a lot of stuff was going on, 60s and 70s. And so, the musicians were living in this time and they were reflecting what was going on in society. And so they came to Ed and he hooked them up, but Berry found out about it. And the head guy who was the producer on it, he decided that Harry balked. He put his job on the line and told Berry that if it wasn't a hit, he was going to quit. And so Berry he let himself be convinced, and it went on to become one of the biggest songs for Motown at the time. So he was so sure of that album's success, Harry balked, the producer, that he ordered a large pressing run for that album, and he was proved right. So Dr. Edward J. Wolfram's contribution to music production, sound engineering, binaural technique, audio enhancement, he's the one that really put those guys on the map quietly, and that was just his contribution. So I can't say enough about Mr. Wolfram. He also did Harold's last album. So that's about it for me. I just hope that people see that we have some really great resources there. I want to encourage everyone to start writing about the music and to put it more into more scholarly things. They're considering not even putting some things into an exhibition at the Charles H. Wright because of the it's not written anywhere, and they don't want to put things on exhibit that aren't scholarly verified. It won't get that way unless we write about it and unless we talk about what's going on. And Kim, I know you're raising a generation of people at Wayne State University to do that. So I want to pass it on to you, and you can talk more about that. My hope.
Oh, thanks very much, Michelle. The resources at the DSC are wonderful, and appreciate you sharing a lot of those in the backstory, and you're so connected to the history of Detroit music. It's so great you're in a position to help to gather and document right now. It's really wonderful. Okay, I'm going to try to share. Can you see my PowerPoint? Are we good? Okay. All right, well, welcome. I am Kim Schroeder, and I run the Archive Administration program at Wayne State University in the School of Information Sciences. And I am a Detroiter, and I am very much in love with the city, and very, very much in love with documenting the amazing people in the city. And what I say is there's been a hero in every block. And so our oral history class has really been part of that. And so today I'm going to take you through some tidbits from the oral histories we've been taking over the last 7 years. Oh, I forgot to put pictures in there. And talk about, we're going to continue to do these oral histories. Certainly we've talked to a few of the same people that DSC has contact with, because they're kind of keys to open up the story to others and to reach others. So let's go ahead and look at some of our adventure over the last few years. So as I've dug around Detroit history, which I've been studying for about 30 years, I started to see the global impact that Detroit has on music. And that's what I want to really continue to research and write about, especially starting this summer. And so just to go back a little further than I can do active oral histories for right now, because these people are no longer here. But Detroit's really been in touch with every genre. So even going back to opera, starting in the 1840s. And I often provide students to the opera theater. So I checked in with them about what was written, very little about Detroit Opera. And so I spoke to Tim Lentz, who works for the Opera Theater, and he shared that, to his knowledge, the ties go back to the 1840s. Our MOT, or Michigan Opera Theater, started around 1919. So they had celebrated, sorry, that was Orchestra Hall. They started much more recently, but they're housed in a large building. And then our classical orientation, I wanted to talk about the symphony. So they just had their 100th anniversary. So we've been very involved in that, and that's a whole nother documentation of itself. The beginnings of those two genres in Detroit, I can't cover through oral histories, but I'm interested in continuing to dig on about that. One of the things that we've really hit on is we've interviewed some symphony musicians, and I didn't realize when I started this that a lot of them moonlit at Motown to add some of the depth of sound you heard in some of those famous songs. And so this is an article that I found the other night, and we actually started interviewing symphony musicians in 2015. So it's before this article came out, and they actually quote Gordon Staples, who is the husband of Beatrice Staples, who we did interview about this. So we've been starting to very in-depth document this. And she talks about how she's a classically trained string musician that would play the symphony during the evening, and after the symphony, go to Motown at night and record after hours. So they were having late midnight sessions to do that. And some of the prejudice there was about that was beneath a classically trained musician to go play at Motown, but obviously they knew better, which was good. So some of these stories we're uncovering are really important because this collaboration, and you heard this in some of the clips that Michelle played, the collaboration and mentorship in Detroit has been phenomenal. And I hear that again and again and again with the musicians we're interviewing. And then you look at Motown developed from our blues and jazz clubs. So we had, a big area called Black Bottom and also Paradise Valley, who were African-American communities who had a tremendous amount of blues and jazz clubs. And that's really where Berry Gordy, who started Motown, he was raised going to those clubs. And that's kind of what gave birth to Motown, that we had these clubs that international jazz and blues artists would come and play. And so we always had this really rich, high level, high quality, these performers coming through the city and using local performers to back them up sometimes and teaching them things, and our local folks teaching them things. And so this give and take and collaboration really is what sort of put in place Motown. And one of the other things that put in place Motown was really our entrepreneurial spirit, partly due to the innovations with the auto industry. And then obviously we've had a strong part in rock that had its impacts from blues and jazz and folk, which we have strong communities in that genre as well. One thing I wanted to say about genres is they're hard to nail down. They sometimes have the labeling comes from some bias in the past. So they're not a great way to label, but just in the context for this presentation, I'm using some of those genre titles, but I know they're problematic. And I actually had a student do a whole paper on genres and the baggage they pull with them and how inaccurate they are. She did it last semester. I'm hoping she publishes that. And then we've got, techno coming from the young Black innovators, which really, I am told, were, kind of the children of the Motown era who had been exposed to all this music and embraced some of the new technology and evolution for parties, for DJ gigs, and to innovate. And I wanted to show you a little bit of our inventory here. So we're at about 39 folks that we've interviewed so far. And I need to get more in depth in this inventory, but we've tried to hit, we're not trying to interview Smokey Robinson. We're trying to interview the support band for Smokey Robinson. We're trying to interview the poster artist who worked with various groups. We're trying to interview, we interviewed just this last fall, the first ever African-American record salesperson. So he was hired from Motown and continued on post Motown to work in the field, and talking about the prejudice he experienced through that. We're talking to people from every genre because there's such a crossover. And that's been really fun. And we've just started getting into female DJs that we're interviewing. So we're gonna hit that hard in this coming fall to try to get their take on their experience. And so this interplay is really interesting. Like, for instance, McKinley Jackson, I'm gonna play a little clip from him. His career is just tremendous, but not only him, but his son was Proof, the rapper Proof. So, you see this amazing generational talent being passed on. I know Melvin Davis's son also has a successful music career. So you see this, obviously the McKinneys, the Gabriels, we see this passed on. And so what's really interesting too is to see that we've been getting deeper into the female perspective and what they've faced. And it's very different from what the men have experienced, because it's kind of a male dominated field to a large extent. So, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was just a little bit about the global impact. So when I first found Melvin, who's a very gregarious, warm person, he did not know that his songs were famous in Europe. And when he performed in Europe after he retired from his day job outside of music, he noticed that people were mouthing the words to his song as he sang, and they knew his work better than local Detroiters. And so the impact of our music outside of this country is something that we really haven't been aware enough of. And part of that is getting back to what Michelle is talking about, which is that we haven't been documenting this. We've been taking kind of our own talent for granted, perhaps, and we haven't realized it. So the organizer of the Detroit A-Go-Go event, which has been going on for a few years now, I mean, he'll bring 300 visitors or more from England to our typical venues to hear some of our most famous and talented folks and really be immersed in Detroit culture. And this is something that's pretty prevalent throughout Europe, South Africa, Australia. So you definitely see this. And of course, probably the most famous example of this might be the documentary Searching for Sugar Man. So Rodriguez actually lives in our neighborhood here. By the way, I live right by the university I teach at. And we see him walking through the neighborhood sometimes. And when I was in Munich, Germany on a bus tour, the couple giving the tour was from South Africa. And when they heard I was from Detroit, they were so enthused they could barely give their tour. They wanted to ask me all these questions about Detroit musicians. And when I told them that, they asked me if I'd ever seen Rodriguez, and I said, yeah, I see him all the time. He lives in my neighborhood. And I honestly thought that they were either going to faint or they didn't believe me. But they're absolutely idolize a lot of our musicians here, and we just take it for granted. And I was joking that I feel like if I would have said, yeah, I see Elvis Presley every day, it would have had the same impact. They would have had the same reaction. So it's things that we need to become more aware of, that we have this great talent. It needs to be better documented, and we need to kind of appreciate what we have and the impact. The other thing about Rodriguez is I was in a Belgian chocolate shop in Brussels, and the ambient music playing in the background, I realized was one of his songs, but they had made sort of a long dance version of it. So it was his song, but they were slicing and dicing and reintroducing it to that audience in ways I had never heard in the US. So, this music is very prevalent and has made an impact. And one of the things in one of my long conversations with Melvin Davis about doing this documentation is he's talked about how our musicians from Detroit have had this amazing influx of collaboration among genres, and then we spread out throughout the world to play concerts we're hired for, but also do session work, we'll also do backup, also just collaborate with musicians all over the world. And so the impact of Detroit musicians is really broad. And so one of the tasks I have as an academic is to try to figure out how to quantify and qualify that, and to continue to do research and write about that. So what I would say is really that we have these genres that we're very strong in, and that, oh, and rap fell off there, I had it on there, sorry. And that it's all a collaborative cycle. There's no hierarchy, you know, classical isn't over here and Motown isn't over here. So we've got all of these things. And so in the city, we call a lot of music from the 60s Motown, although it wasn't all Motown music. It wasn't all associated with that label at all. Many people are often shocked to know that Aretha Franklin never worked for Motown. But the English term for it is kind of Northern soul. And so we've been adopting that a lot. So Melvin Davis will often say he's a Northern, he represents Northern soul. And so these different names that mean a little different things, but we're very broad, and we're very deep in talent and exposure. So with that, I'd like to show you some clips and some quotes from some of the oral histories that we've done. So one of the things is I make our students always ask one question, the same one question of all of our musical oriented interviews. And that was kind of what made Detroit a hotbed of talent in your mind. And this is what Baruga said. So Baruga was actually nicknamed that by a Swami. He played at Woodstock. He's a very talented drummer. So this was his answer, but I'm also going to play a clip. It's about 3 minutes long. I'm hoping the system doesn't choke. So if it does, I'll come back on and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I'm going to, you know what, when I started to this, I'm going to have to reshare it because I don't think I clicked the share audio button. Just a second. Okay, hopefully this will work. Could somebody get, Michelle, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio?
And I used to play there with Bill Jennings, who helped write Honky Tonk.
Yes, I can hear it.
Played with Ray Charles, who was one of the teachers of West Montgomery, who got Jimmy Smith to play the organ instead of the piano. That's Bill Jennings. And he played in Detroit for a long time. And with Lyman Woodyard, another great musician, that's who I played with at the Frolic Bar. So Bobby now is with me at the Chessmate, okay? And we're playing there. And Downbeat in about 65 or 6 writes up on us. They have a rhythm and blues rhythm section with jazz soloists. They didn't know how to say fusion yet. A few months later, Larry Coryell comes out, and they term fusion. You see, so I was always, going to that. Now, at the same time, at the Chessmate, many people were coming there. John Lee Hooker, who I would hear in the early airwaves. Jim and Gene for Forecast, were Harvey Brooks, who played the bass on Mr. Tambourine Man with Dylan. And he was in Electric Flag. Junior Wells. And I became the house band there, and also another group. There was 2 of us, Hal McKinney and us. Hal McKinney is very well known, and he had a far out jazz group, and we had the rhythm and blues jazz, with diffusing. For a while, sometimes I even used drums, conga drums, timbales, trumpet, trombone, sax, organ, and guitar and bass. Sometimes I had an 8, 9, 10-piece band playing in some different places, like experimenting with, rock, funk, blues, Latin in world music. Because in my early youth in '59, also I used to play with Matt Gozé and the Tamburitza Orchestra round the World Review, and he made me learn a song from every nation in the world. I had to learn the difference between the Slovenian polka, the Polish polka, the Mexican polka, the Serbian polka, which is a kolo, and the Russian. You know, they all have circle dances. I had to learn, you know, and polkas, and I had to learn all of those things. And he gave me a world view. So meanwhile, I'm getting this esoteric teaching. I'm getting the world teaching, you know, around. I'm getting the jazz and the blues. And then one day I'm sitting at home and I hear a call. Hello. This is, hello. This is Hooker. Is Booker there? I said, Hooker? Downley Hooker. But Maury told me to call you, said we should play the blues together. I says, sir, I'm honored to play the blues with you. You're my hero. You know, this is the guy I was hearing on my little transistor radio, man. This guy's calling me. You know, man, I went right down to he says, okay, tonight at the Chessmate. I goes down there, you know, because I was there all the time. I set up early, right? I'm sitting there behind my drums, and I see John Lee Hooker come through the door. You know, the door is open. You can see him actually getting out of the cab and coming in, comes right up to there, sets his thing up over there, sets it all up and plugs it in, you know, and I come up to him and shake hands. I go like this, you know. He says, now you playing with Hooker. Wherever I go, you go. Oh, man.
So, very animated interview, obviously, and just showing the wide exposure that he got in this period of time in the 60s to all kinds of music and how that enriched his ability as a musician. And throughout his interview, he's doing a lot of sound effects with his mouth to imitate the different teachings he's learned about how to improve his work with drums.
And I used to...
We've got a quote here also from Dennis Coffey. So you might know the famous song from I think it's early 70s, Scorpio. So he had a big hit on that, but he was also a session player at Motown, and he still plays in the community. So, and he was talking about our music was molded by the people coming to hear us play. And he was talking about that he sees the best session players, certainly the best jazz players, etc., all over, you know, from every genre, despite, again, his traveling. And I just kept seeing this over and over again, that you hear this, that our musicians have been very generous to each other, that we're very collaborative, that we're supportive.
That's
and
right.
We want to keep learning and absorbing all different kinds of music and all different styles. And that makes our players, I think, much stronger. And here's a quote from Melvin Davis talking about music being slowly embedded in him because of the environment here. And I see a misspelling, sorry. It was a graduate from the transcript. But as these different talented people in these different parts of his organization came to him, he very understood how to intertwine them. And that's part of the sort of entrepreneurial spirit that we saw. And I wanted to back this up too. We didn't just interview folks from the 60s. We're interviewing current musicians that are still trying to make it or are just starting to make it regionally. So Mike is somebody who's a very strong songwriter and has had some regional success. But he thought, well, I've got to go to a bigger city. I'm going to go to Chicago. And he tried to make it there. And he found that it was more a competitive nature than a collaborative nature. And you know, his genre is American folk, and so if you see anything here, and I wasn't that familiar with it until we started interviewing these folks, but they write really powerful stories in their music. And we have a very strong American folk community here, and they are very supportive. They all go to each other's gigs. They collaborate, they write together, they do podcasts. So, there's a very strong supportive community where they can do their best work. And that is still embedded in Detroit music scene as it has always been, which is a really beautiful thing, and why so many people that become very famous still come back here and live. Eminem still lives here. Kid Rock still has a place here. And as well as a lot, Aretha Franklin and, a lot of folks still have a home here and collaborate and have studios locally because they feel comfortable and they feel that collaborative spirit. So here's a little clip from Mckinley Jackson, who is amazing. I've seen him play several times. He's a very generous man, but he's the musical director for the Temptations and obviously has an amazing, amazing career. So here's a quote from here, both a quote written and then some audio.
Library on the campus of Wayne State University. Mr. Jackson is a producer, composer, orchestrator, arranger, and skilled musician. He has been described by his artistic peers and followers alike as one of the greatest talents to come out of Detroit and a musical genius and legend. This interview is about Mr. Jackson's contribution to the development of the Detroit sound. Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I want to start with a basic question, which is pretty loaded. What is it about Detroit that develops so many talented musicians?
I have thought about this in reference to the Detroit sound, Chicago sound, the Memphis, the Southern sounds, the Philadelphia sound. I've come up with a thing where I think when guys grow up together, breathe the same air, eat the same food, walk in the same soil, they build up, it's just my opinion, they build up a certain, whether they know each other or not, a certain aesthetic relationship to the location that they grow up in. And this is true probably in Philly, and I'm sure it's true in the South and Chicago. They all have a little different slant, same notes, same B flat, but they have a different interpretation about it, excuse me. But I've always thought of that way. Naturally, Detroit, we've been supplying the music world great artists for a long time, even before Motown, whether people believe it or not. Going back to Donald Byrd or Barry Harris, Kurt Lively, some of the great jazz, Marcus Belgrave, Marcus settled here, but he's a Detroiter in my mind. So I don't know. I just always thought it was the collectiveness of the music, spirit, and the environment. It's just kind of give us a collective viewpoint out, and that's communicated through the musicians. Naturally, music is about having a conversation, and this is translated in the conversation.
So like the conversation of the collective makes the sound.
It makes the sound. We speak the same language with the same dialect.
That's important.
So it's not like the Babel. We're not all out there babbling about the tower, But I think that's valid. That's my personal opinion, but I think it's valid.
I think his depth of understanding was really powerful about this too, because his family's been involved for generations now too in successful music from Detroit. But I think also he's talking about us having the same conversation and sort of the same language, but that language in Detroit is an international language because of the influence of the auto industry bringing immigrants together and bringing folks from the South together. And so our language is really universal. And that's why I think it speaks universally in a global sense. And there's been such an impact and such a demand for Detroit artists throughout the world.
Library on
and here's a quote from Galen McKinney, whose father was Harold McKinney, who you heard mentioned a few times. And I love this quote about the fact that her father told her, "We don't let you out," meaning on the stage, unless you know what you are doing. So there's talking about the strong mentorship there, right? That if you are representing Detroit, you're going to know what you're doing, and you're going to have been kind of put through the testing and practice so that you are well represented and you're being your best self. So it was, I think, a very strong reflection.
It was funny. Sometimes the musicians, like when Gay was playing, when she first started playing jazz, Marcus was the front on it. He stopped playing the trumpet, came back there, pushed her off the drum set, and he started playing it. He said, "You got to keep it in the pocket and you got to keep it straight so we can build on it. You can't be crapping around out here." Yeah. So he gave her a lesson and he played the whole tune. And then she was mortified. Yeah. Then he got back up, picked up his trumpet again. He says, "Go on, play now. Play good." Yeah. She said she never forgot that. Yeah. That he did it on a gig, man.
Well, and she's Grammy nominated now. So, this mentorship, this strength is absolutely, pushing everyone to be their best, for sure. So one of the exciting interviews I did one time was with Allie Willis. And if you don't know her, you never met her, because you never forget her. She was quite a character. And she passed only a few months after this interview, and I was so sad about that, because we struck up a strong friendship after this interview. But she has this incredible career from being from Detroit. She would sit on the lawn outside of Motown and just watch all the stars go in and out. And she lived close by, and she would hear the music coming out of Motown, and that really affected her. And so she had a very successful songwriting career. She's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame in LA. And just, she would have these conversations with me, and she's like, "Oh, the first time I heard one of my songs on the radio, I was in a room with Prince and we were in the studio." It's just really just nothing. She had this humongous life, right? But she did amazing things, and she was always trying to bring up Detroit artists. She was also a visual artist, and she would mentor Detroiters who are Detroit artists, and she actually had them bring their visual art to her home in LA, and invited her well-to-do friends to show them Detroit art so they could sell their art to LA. I mean, she just did the best you could imagine with her celebrity, and very precious, great loss when she passed. But she has, I grabbed a little excerpt from our transcript that, she really understood that the philosophy that Berry Gordy took to Motown, which is that, we need to showcase this talent. I hear this talent on every corner. I see all of this live music everywhere. We need to package it and monetize it and make it our own and bring that money home. And so she also really, and we hear this a lot, complimented the radio stations. We had early Black radio stations, Black owned radio stations, which was really unheard of. And they were playing more of the music that we were hearing in our neighborhoods on the radio than was typical for most communities. So. And then we also have interviewed some experts. So Brad Hales was a musician, but also owns a record store that's really well known in the area. And he's had a lot of very thoughtful, deeper thoughts about the depth of talent here in Detroit. And so he mentioned some area. Cass Corridor is culturally rich area, artist area in Detroit, right by the university. And he just talks about venues, but he talks about, again, that sort of depth of stuff. And at the end of this clip, he says, to be on top of blues and rock, and you have great punk, electronic, classical, our contribution to hip hop, to create techno, electro, we're involved in everything. And so that was nice documentation there too. So some of the trends that I've been seeing in these 39 interviews that we've done now is the number of venues has been really, really helpful to musicians. And you heard that in Booker's clip too. but the raw talent that we had from all of the inputs in our community, the entrepreneurial spirit, the support and mentoring and collaboration, our diversity of culture, and that created this conversation, right? Going back to McKinley Jackson. So those are the trends that I'm seeing in the information that I'm gathering now, which has been just really lovely to experience and to hear the joy in people's voices when we call them and say, we'd like to interview you and hear your story. You know, so that's been really beautiful. Like Melvin Davis was on the road with Smokey Robinson for 3.5 years as his drummer, but also has written 600 songs, right? And had a couple hits. So you see this amazing depth of exposure that the people that are from Detroit have had or have adopted Detroit as their home. I threw this into the app, to some of the transcripts into the app to see what comes out. So this is an infographic. So the bigger the word, the more often people's names or words are mentioned. And so these are 3 different oral histories we did. And I just thought it was really interesting to see how completely diverse the generation of topics are in these 3. And I just picked 3 randomly. So you can see that we're covering a lot of different topics in each interview. And I'm really pleased that we're able to gather this. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that we do this class every fall. I do some interviews on my own, like I did Allie Willis on my own. Throughout the year. If I find someone that has a tight schedule, I might just go ahead and do it then. They can't wait till fall. And a lot of folks travel or, are traveling to perform in the fall. But also we donate all of these to the Reuther Library on campus, which is our Wayne State archive. So they are housed there. And I just wanted to thank Mike Dukevich, who is the first one. He was a student in my class, but already a music expert and knew a lot of people. And he has worked with DSC as well. And he introduced me to a lot of these people, including Melvin Davis, to start doing the interviews. And from there, I was addicted and continued on. Melvin, obviously Carlton, who helped even to set up ARSC as a Detroit-centered session this year. Michelle, who has helped you get some names to interview, and Drew Schultz, who works with Melvin, and also was in his 20s hired as the Four Tops musical director. That's how talented he is. So he's a young man, but really in love with Motown and that genre, and continues to write new music in that style. The dozens of students that have conducted these interviews, they've been just stars, and they're so precious to me, and they've done such good work. And to see their eyes on our last session every semester, where they're just glowing and sharing what they learned and the amazing things and the amazing kindness we've seen from the talent that we've interviewed, has been amazing. And of course, the Reuther, who's supporting and creating access to these oral histories. So that's kind of what I had to say. Now, how are we doing on time? We're okay, little long. So I'm gonna stop sharing. And I see a couple questions. Go ahead. Hi, Daniel.
I have a question for both of you. Now, Kim spoke of how, first of all, this is an amazing presentation. Thank you. But I'm curious to know, I know Kim spoke of how interesting it was to learn about that the musicians from the Detroit Symphony Orchestra moonlit at Motown and were instrumental in forming the Motown sound. Were there other similar kinds of interesting facts you were surprised to learn from collecting these oral histories?
Wow, so many. Yeah, I think that the Ed Wolfram oral history, where we learned about them sneaking around Berry Gordy, was really tremendous. And we didn't really talk about United Sound, but that was a separate studio that Motown sometimes used, but many famous albums, including Parliament, George Clinton recorded there. And off the top, I mean, the list is long. I mean, I think Dylan has recorded there. I mean, just everybody. So just learning more about United Sound, and it still physically exists. It is still a recording studio. So, that has been iconic, and Carlton helped to get it on the National Historic Register so that it would be protected. We haven't interviewed any of the DSO folks that might have performed on Parliament or other Funkadelic yet, but I want to get into that much more deeply. So I'm hoping to do that. What I was told from the What's Going On story was that they were hiding it because they thought he would fire them. And when he heard about it, he did call them into the office and they thought they were all going to get fired. And then he heard it. They played the song for him and he backed off and said, oh, okay. And so this was the first sort of not bubblegum type of song that Motown released. And to my knowledge, it's still the #1 selling record for Motown because it's so powerful.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Michelle?
Could you say the question again?
Were there any interesting or facts that you were surprised to learn in collecting these oral histories?
Okay, so, I'm only a purveyor of them. Most of these were collected by Carlton Goltz, and reviewing them and listening to them, I think I was surprised by the commonality of experience that was happening to all these different musicians. They all experienced the social coming together because they were really friends. They were really family. They argued, they had fights, they had love affairs. Somebody take somebody's man, and they all the human stuff that was going on. But at the root of that was this vast love for each other, for the city, for the music, and respect for people's learning process. And sometimes they give you the kick in the pants that you needed, to be excellent. And it's really such a human story. I think I was surprised by and the networking. Detroit is really up south in a really small town. If you are trying to engage with the music and with the people and create your voice, you're going to run into the same people over and over again. So it really calls for a good relationship. So I was surprised by the commonality of experience.
I was just going to add to that. Detroit is known as the biggest small town. You hear that all the time because we are a large city, but we're all interrelated. It's amazing.
Yes.
I feel like I know most of the city through various lifetimes that I've had here, various genre, various ways I've interacted. But we all, and I think, social media drives that home where you're looking at friends lists of new friends and you're like, wait, I have 20, 40 people in common with them. And it's just, there's something about the city. We are so network oriented.
We are. I thought I saw a question in the chat too about DSC.
Yes.
How did they find the support for it? And I tell you, that ride is on the seat of the pants. Okay, it's like we're at the point now where I think we've established ourselves in the family of repositories, and that was due. The Kresge really helped. The Mellon grant really helped us. When we got the Mellon grant, I think the other repositories say, okay, these people are real, and we're going to be here. And I think that the sustaining of it is where we are now to try to build the kind of support that will lead us into the future for a long, long time, and that those collections will be preserved and protected. So that's where we are now. We're learning how to find those sustainers. And we got a great start with the Mellon, but they gave us $100,000. And so that's actually was paying my salary. And even though that's going to end this December, I feel confident that the neighborhood people that we've gotten relationships with, and they're going to help us get this Bluebird open. And once we have this physical plant, and this lovely legacy that we and I encourage everybody who's listening to this to consider putting some money and or volunteer time to keep us sustained, because that's where it's at. It's word of mouth, as well as, you know, going to these, trying to find sustaining donors to help us. So right now we're kind of switching from grant sustained to actually community sustained, and it's a wild ride.
Michelle, I wanted to say too. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say too, you know, one thing we didn't get to in this, but you've got other great collections like the Greystone Jazz Museum collection, including a lot of video interviews with some jazz greats. It is just a really priceless collection.
It is a priceless book. And we have radio shows and things like that. I mean, there is such a wealth of material in here that is Detroit, and trying to build trust so that we can continue collecting. That's a real, that's a puzzle, because these people have been ignored and mistreated so much. You know, they're not very forthcoming with a lot of the their stuff is still in people's basements. And as you can see, there's talented people in every neighborhood. There's basements all over the city that have wonderful collections in them that the people don't know how to take care of them and stuff like that. So it's a project. We've got to raise awareness.
I saw Janice's question about Don Was. Several people have told me I should interview him. I haven't broached that yet, because we've been more kind of doing people that never got a chance to talk to the media for the most part. So Don Was is pretty well known nationally, but I would love to talk to him because he'd be so interested. And Jack White has a store down the block from me, a record store, and of course I'd love to talk to him too. But he gets documented. He's in the papers. He's in the media. But we want to sort of tell the background stories more so.
There's another question for Kim from Janice. Who wants to know if you've interviewed any of the musicians from the Detroit Symphony Orchestra that might still be living and that performed on Motown recordings and Parliament Funkadelic recordings.
I think I answered that earlier. Yeah. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today and for asking questions, and I really appreciate your interest.
Yes, and I think DSC would really appreciate it if you could kind of give us a call and bring a check, because we're still getting that Bluebird together. So I really would appreciate any support that people could send our way, DetroitSound.org /give or /volunteer. We'd love to see you.
Absolutely support the DSC, and I look forward to exploring the collection you have online.
Oh yes, you gotta go. All that stuff I pulled is online, is available
through SoundCloud, right? But also, you know, on your website as well.
Yes.
Which there are links I saw in the chat that were shared. So yeah, go find them, find the links and then check it out. This has been amazing. Thank you both, Michelle and Kim.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
To the audience for joining this session. It's been great. And enjoy the remainder of the conference.
Thank you. Bye.